Hi everyone, my name is Aeri. Welcome to our AAMC announcement. What are you going to do next event? I am happy to be here with you, but I am not the only instructor in this room. We are joined by a whole host of teachers off camera who will be addressing questions, giving recaps in the chat. So I know nerves are high and anxiety is at an all-time, and I recognize that there's a lot of unanswered questions out there. I'm going to do my best to try to address these as much as I can to give you some guidance and at least help you plan out your next step. So I'm excited to do this with you all. And so let's get started. Hi, hello. So lots of things going on, right? And I do actually really appreciate the questions that you throw into there because we're going to curate through them. And if we don't get a chance to answer them today, we're going to have like an FAQ list of the most common questions that was asked today. So don't feel shy. Actually, go ahead and ask, and we'll do our best to address them as fast as we can. We got typers going on there. Hey, I see familiar names. That's so fun. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I've got a couple of things for you to take a look at. And yeah, let's do this, okay? So first up, let's talk about an overview of some of the changes. There's lots of questions about timing, about questions, about how test day is going to look like. And yes, it is recorded, and you can find a recording of this afterwards, on the YouTube page. So don't go crazy. If you miss something, it's all going to be there for you, okay? Okay, so let's talk. Here is a table of what we have pulled from the AAMC website with regards to the new information released last Friday, in addition as a comparison to what it used to look like, okay? So the big takeaways here is that there have been a number of questions removed for every one of the 4 sections. So there's 11 questions removed from the 3 science sections, and then 5 questions removed from the cars section. They've also reduced the time as it's necessary to do that in order to fit 3 test administrations per day. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the time that's been reduced is 19 minutes per the science sections and then 9 minutes for the cars sections. Okay, so that's something you can do. This is something that the AAMC has now said on their site, and they have adjusted the timing there. There was a bit of a typo there when they first released it on Friday, but this has been adjusted to it now. Another thing you notice that in addition to the time of the sections that has been reduced, the breaks have also been reduced as well. So that's huge. This is really big, but I want you to kind of put this into perspective. The entire test seated time alone previous to the changes was just a bit over 6 hours, so 6.25 hours, whereas right now we've reduced it by 1 hour. Now, reducing questions, I know there's a lot of questions about does it weigh more? What is this going to do to pacing? How do I adjust my timing? And I'll cover that in just a little bit. But I want you to recognize that overall, it's an hour. It's just a bit over an hour reduced time total, spread out over 4 sections. In addition to that, it's going to be a bit of time released, taken away from the break, okay? So this is something you can kind of sit and ponder and think about, like, how does this affect you? But this is information that we pulled from the AAMC. Now, here's the deal. I know there's a lot of questions of like, which ones are going to be like passages and how many passages and which discretes. And I have to be honest, we don't know that information. The AAMC has not released it. We can make best guesses for that, but we don't really know. Like even for cars, I would say like, it is 5 questions that looks very conveniently like a passage length, but we don't know if they're taking out a passage or they're just taking out 5 questions and leaving the same number of passages. So I wish we had that information for you all, but at this point in time, it's just best guesses, okay? So another good question that has come in, and I want to make sure to address as well, field questions are questions that don't count for your test. And here's like a really good thing to keep in mind. Every AAMC administered MCAT, like official test day, has had field questions in there. You can't tell that they're field. So it's important that you treat every question on test day as if it was a real question. But what they've done in order to reduce the number of questions, but still maintain relative accuracy for scaling, is that they just took out the field questions. So on their end, it's actually not a big deal. This is probably a lot closer to what the counted questions look like. So So I don't want you to fret about anything like that, because the way that this has to be done is that this test has to be comparable to all other previous administrations. Otherwise, it's not fair. So I don't want you to like think you're being, this administration is skewed in a way that is not fair to you. I mean, granted, these are difficult times, and so I totally recognize that. But I want you to understand they're going to make it as close to the real deal as possible. Okay, so I don't want you to feel like doing this test is going to be, there's pros and cons to this, just like it is with really any test. Okay. A field question is just a question that does not count for test day. So there's no field questions on the administration of the 2020 exams moving forward. Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, and just to be clear, field questions are essentially a way for them to test the waters as to whether that question can be used in a future MCAT administration. That's what field questions are. Okay. So you can always head back to this later on if you thought this was a good way to kind of summarize this information. Let's talk about other additional changes that were happening. So 3 additional test dates were added to the testing calendar. So we got one in June 28th now, and then 2 stacked at the very end at the end of September. All test dates in 2020, including the ones that were newly added, will have 3 test times per day. So for all of the MCAT test dates, there will be 3 times. And so there's one at 6:30 a.m., 12:15, and 6 p.m. These are all local time to you. The reason why they did this, obviously, because of all the cancellations, but in addition to that, social distancing requirements dictate that you have to be a certain distance apart from the people next to you. And so they can't actually allow people to test the normal capacity. So they had to add more times. This is the reason why the test had to be shorter. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. This is it's a big change. We've always talked about how test day starts right at 8 a.m. And so starting earlier, starting in the afternoon, starting at night. Honestly, I don't want you to like pick a test time and then feel like you are bound to this, or if you hate it, you're doomed. You will have the option of changing this. Okay, to be clear, when this first kind of gets set up, and we don't know when you will know when your test date is. It's possible they might release that information ahead of time, but at this point, we don't know. We just know that the registration is open on May 7th. So if you already have a current test date, that will be slotted in randomly into one of these 3 points. Okay, so on registration day, you're gonna go ahead and take a look, okay? And then if that doesn't work for you, you can switch it. You can switch it to whatever time, maybe even to a different day, maybe to a different location. That doesn't cost you anything. The AAMC has waived all of these fees. So you can pick the time, but if you've already got a test date currently, it will slot you into one of those and you can change that, okay? So that's really important. And I want you to kind of think of this as a pros and cons rather than, you're doomed if you don't get your desired test date. Some people are very good morning people. Other people are definitely the night. So think about like your own day, when are you the most awake? And then think about what you would give up in order to get that test spot. Let's say you're a night person and you got slotted to 6:30. Would you be willing to travel? Would you be willing to take it a different day? Right? So the power is back in your hands. You don't have to, somebody did the fates, they don't just choose for you. You can choose to do this. It's just more about like, what are you willing to give up in order to get your preferred time, okay? But once that time is there, team, this is something that you definitely need to practice. It's really important. Yeah, so just as a quick reminder, you will automatically be assigned a time once you sign up for that test date. And you can change that when everything opens on May 7th on the AAMC website. Yes, well, so if you had a test date that was canceled, I'm not sure how they're accommodating that. I'm gonna be honest. Right now, all students who were canceled on a test date were put in a placeholder at the end of September. That does not mean that's when you're testing. That's just, they have to leave you in the system somehow. I don't know how they're gonna be arranging for those people who are currently at the end of September to figure out where they're gonna be in the next, when they release. I'm not sure. So I wish I had that information for you, but keep a close eye on the AAMC Twitter site, and they will be able to kind of give that information as they figure this out, okay? Yeah, so a lot of questions kind of coming in. There was a guest I was talking about, like, how do I focus with the mask on for 5 hours? I mean, humans are amazingly adaptable. I firmly believe this. And let's kind of consider this from a physician's perspective. Like, you are in this field, or you are choosing to be in this field because you're trying to show that you have the skills necessary to be able to help people. And helping people doesn't mean you know exactly what's going to come ahead of time. So adaptability is a key component. And I feel like even though this isn't done on purpose, you're not, putting yourself in a situation where you're in a pandemic. I think showing that level of adaptability is something that we all can strive to do a little bit better. And so it's not great having to test with gloves and a mask. I 100% agree, but you can practice and work around this and at least adjust to it. You're never going to probably love it, but you can adjust to this, okay? At this time, it does look like the testing centers are requiring, I don't know if they're requiring, I'm gonna be honest. I don't know if they're requiring or if they're just providing, but I did see mention of gloves and masks on test day, okay? So yeah, practice with it. Practice when especially when you know your time, all that stuff, practice with that stuff on. Yeah, so they are recommended for sure. And they're gonna do their best to clean between the test times. Okay, so a little bit earlier, somebody had asked about scheduling, schedule to take it, cancel to be funded. If you were refunded, you're out of the system. I'm fairly certain, but again, you want to double check with the AAMC. If your test date was canceled and you were in one of those placeholders, I'm not entirely sure what those test dates are going to, what's going to happen with those. I don't know if you get higher priority. I don't know any of that kind of information, but I would ask the AAMC and see if they have any answers for you. Okay. So let's talk about the content. Content has not changed. The amount of stuff that is testable in this administration is no different from any previous administrations. So that means, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, don't do anything different. Don't study anything differently. Don't time anything differently. You do all that stuff the exact same way you were previously doing. It doesn't mean you're starting from scratch. All the hard work you've had to build up to this point is still just as applicable and useful right now as it ever has been. So your preparedness is going to be well rewarded. I don't want you to throw away all that studies just because a couple of smaller things have changed. All that stuff is remaining the same. Okay. Kaplan is, we'll talk about that. That's a great question. I'm super excited to share this with you. I really am. So we will. In terms of how likely future test dates are going to be canceled, there was an FAQ on the AAMC site that was citing something to do with regional cancellations rather than, I don't know if they're going to make any more like blanket global decisions about canceling test dates. So it's very possible at this point they might be moving more towards, if your region has still got like an active pandemic, or maybe the city guidelines have decided that you still need to stay home, that might end up canceling. But you want to kind of keep an eye out for how the pandemic is being handled in your city, especially if currently you're registered for like the end of May, early June test dates. I would keep an eye out for that. Okay. Okay, yeah, beyond September, currently we only know to the last two test dates in September, the 27, the 28, 29, I believe. Those are the last two test dates for the 2020 administration at this point, okay? Okay, so another big thing, and this doesn't count towards your seated time, like your testing thing, but one thing, in order to shorten the time, they got rid of the tutorial. So the tutorial was how to use the testing interface, like how to use the highlighting and outlining, all that stuff. So generally speaking, I think there was between 5 to 10 minutes budgeted for the tutorial. So they've taken that out. Really, really important you get a chance to see that. On the AAMC website, there is, I believe it was called the Hub. There is a way for you to take a look at that testing, that testing interface ahead of time. You don't have to purchase anything. You can just go there and see what it looks like. It's important that you do get that practice. If you take any of the AAMC full lengths, the ones that the AAMC provides, they have that same tutorial in the full lengths themselves. So don't go ahead and do that if you already have the AAMC full lengths, but it is important that you know how to use the interface, because, test day is not the good time to figure out that for the first time. Okay. In addition to this, a lot of students have talked about how they use that tutorial time to take quick notes. They do the brain dump thing. They, put all the equations onto their paper during that tutorial because you're allowed to write on your board. Don't do that if you don't have the tutorial time. Like, I want you to think about the usefulness of doing things like brain dumps and see if that's actually like something you use in your own practice. Try to work around it. Try to solidify that information early on so you're not having to tenuously hold it in your head, okay? Yeah, the brain dump is just like how some people like to write down like all the physics equations they can think of, or like maybe they're like, I'm going to write down all the amino acids, something like that. That's what I always termed as a brain dump. Some people like to do this. I'm not saying you certainly have to. And this administration, with the tutorial being omitted, I would highly recommend against doing anything like this unless you think it's very, very worthwhile for your section. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more in terms of the timing. Exactly the same. Okay, rounded to the nearest tenth. It's going to be 1.6 minutes for science, 1.7 minutes per question for cars. That is the same prior to the longer test. So I don't want you to adjust your timing. That's going to be all exactly the same. Okay. We don't know how many passages and discretes are cut per section. We can make guesses, but we don't know until the AAMC gives us that information, or we don't ever know, and it's just something you find out on test day. Okay, so we can't predict what the AAMC is going to release as information, and it is possible that you just won't know that information until the first set of administrations. What I would recommend you do, and this is something we talk about in class very often, is we talk about the idea of scanning through the whole section and making a quick little judgment about the passages. We talk about the triaging aspect there. I think it's extra important that you do this, especially for the first couple of test dates, unless we know more information from the AAMC. You want to scan through, see how many passages there are, and at least just track the number of passages. You don't have to worry about the number of questions, but at least track the number of passages, as well as take a quick tally of the discrete questions, and then you'll have a better sense with your timing. If there are still 10 passages in that science section, you're going to want to pick it up the pace because that's a lot more time, less time per question then. Okay. Yeah, and so the AAMC is not going to come up with a shorter test, and I'll talk a little bit more about why they're making that decision and what we are going to do in response. Okay, so just hold tight to that question. Same amount of time. I mean, so in terms of like the triage aspect, it still takes, I would say, 2 minutes to officially do that, but this is something you're going to want to practice. Triaging means just to take a scan, a look at how many passages there are, and just give a quick little gut check as to what you think would be the difficulty level. So discrete questions are questions that are not associated with the passage. They're all on their own. There's in the prior exam, there were 15 of them scattered throughout the science sections. Right now, we don't know how many discretes there are with the shorter test though. Okay, so plan ahead for your breaks. No 30-minute lunch, which means that it's a 5-hour test and you have to power through with 3 10-minute breaks. And this is kind of an adjustment for sure. I think, I think one thing you want to kind of keep in mind is that you don't have time to have full meals. And I also don't want you to skip your breaks. I know that the anxiety is high, that you're afraid a little bit about getting back to your seat on time, but take your breaks, just don't linger outside the testing area, and grab a quick snack. So like trail mixes, something that is like energy packed, but easy to eat really quickly. That's important to kind of think ahead as well and to practice with, okay? So plan ahead for those breaks, think about what you're gonna do, make sure you have a good solid meal prior to the start, and then have something ready, I guess, for you when you're all done. Okay. Yeah, okay, so let's talk about some of the common questions. I know I've kind of like baited you about the whole like shorter test. The first question being, will Kaplan have practice tests with the new 2020 format? Are we going to provide you? So before I answer this, I want to give a little bit of context as to why the AAMC is choosing not to do this. Every full length is very, very carefully scaled. In order for this to match the usual distribution, you can't just randomly take out 11 questions and not affect the way that this is going to be scaled. It's really, really hard. There's a ton of effort and work that goes into doing a lift of just taking out questions, but still making the scaling accurate. The AAMC has just said, we're not going to do it. It's too much work. It's just too hard to do. We're not going to do it. In response, though, I just like literally 2 hours ago got information from our content team, our psychometricians, that that Kaplan is going to come out with a shorter practice test. So more details will be forthcoming. Kaplan is going to have a shorter practice test that is going to be accurately assessed by many psychometricians, and it's going to be carefully analyzed to make sure that it's statistically still okay and scaled. It's really, really important that you recognize how tough of a lift this is, and that it's not an easy thing to do, which is why it's going to take us a while to produce this. But what I do know is that it will be good to go on May 22nd. So if you're counting, May 22nd is exactly 1 week prior to the first administration of the new exam. So for those of you who are like Kaplan students, you will have that exam. And if you're testing on May 29th, you will have that last exam to essentially accurately assess where you guys will be at. Now, it's not going to be free, but if you have the 7-book bundle, if you have any of the access to the full length, that's going to be available for you. Okay. Yeah, you have no idea how excited I was about this. In terms of future plans, we are looking into doing more full lengths like this and rolling them out on basis, but it's going to be like no promises beyond that first one. We just know that the first one is going to be released on May 22nd. Okay. So yeah, that's exciting. I'm excited that that we're able to do this for you all, and that you get a chance to do some test-like practice, at least one before your test day. Yeah, yeah. Look into. I believe on the page you have the option of buying the full lengths separately, and then once you do that, you'll have access to that. Or if you're one of our students, that will automatically be provided for you. Okay. Okay, it is going to be based on a current Kaplan full length. If you're one of our students, it's going to be one of the ones in the middle, which is more likely the ones that people don't actually get to. So probably like, yeah, I'm going to say somewhere in the middle of the 11 in there. Which one exactly it is, we're not quite sure. So, okay. Yeah, the normal ones are completely still there. Don't worry about that. They're not going to go away. And I think that actually brings up another really good point. Like it's better to over project. Like how awesome are you going to feel if you're used to an 8-hour exam and then on test you're like 5 hours was a cinch, even if I had the shorter break. So keep that in mind, that even if you have and you're going to stick with the full length practice of the usual 7 hours, that's not a bad thing. That is something that is actually going to fare better in general for you in the long term. So I don't want you to stop practicing even if you don't have like realistic test day timing practice. It's still something you can totally do on any regular full length. Okay. Yeah, I guess I could talk about that just real quick one more time. If you've already been scheduled for a test, what happened if it was canceled is that it got put at the end of September. As a placeholder just means you're in the system for a test date, but because your test date was canceled, they didn't know quite yet where to put you. Where you will be put up, I'm not sure, or whether you'll get higher priority. That's something that the AAMC is going to have to handle. Okay, good question. Something to do with applications. Let's talk about that now. How will the MCAT delay affect the application cycle this year? And in the sister question to this one is, which schools are not going to take the MCAT anymore? Like, what can I do to kind of work around this crazy thing with the MCAT as my last linchpin for my application? So I want to kind of flip this around, and I want you to think about the perspective of the AAMC. No, not the AAMC, of the med schools. So med schools, they're usually like waiting, and when the applications are open for submission through MCAS, it goes through processing, and then once those are all kind of complete and they get sent to the med schools are just like a flood of applications. And so for their end, it's really important that they have ways of making clear distinctions of like yes, no, things like that. And so the MCAT is one of them. The MCAT is one of the things they use to just make a first pass decision as to whether or not your application is good to go on to the next step. Without the MCAT score, it's it's like most schools won't take it. And again, there are exceptions to this, but I want you to now think about what's going on right now. Like upwards of a third of people who are intending to apply the cycle are stuck in this weird limbo of not having an MCAT score when they intended to have it already done. So when they usually open up their doors and they're like waiting for their submissions, they don't get their usual flood of applicants. So what this all means is, from their perspective, they just don't have as good of a pool, right? And so, you know, from the med school's perspective, they have to necessarily extend this out and consider applications that are submitted later in the cycle longer than they usually would look at it, because they just don't have as many applicants to look at. Okay, so there's no hard and fast rule for really any of these. These are all school dependent. The MCAT delays will likely pretty much be affecting all applications being considered. A lot of med schools have made official statements about this, you know, how long they're going to be looking into. Some of them are even looking at, like, you know, if you have really old MCAT scores, they've extended how far back that MCAT score can be good for applications this round. Some of them are like, we're going to look at your application anyways, and then we'll think about the MCAT score later on. So a lot of that is like key information you want to keep in mind, not just for you in terms of like, you know, whether the MCAT, I'm going to be able to get it done on time. I think that's less of a concern this year. It's more important that you just study for it, you get to your goal score, and you rock that MCAT, and not necessarily about, am I going to do it as fast as I possibly can because I'm delayed? Like, it's not just you that's delayed, everybody is delayed. All students, all med schools, the application cycle, everything is delayed. So I don't want you to rush this process. It's pretty important, and it's still important for most schools. And so it's just a good decision overall to go ahead and consider taking the MCAT, even if it's a little bit later than you normally would want to do this, okay? Let's see. So I have another great question. Are the schools allowing apps before MCAT score? Some schools are, yep. Are there schools that are waiving MCAT scores or lowering their acceptance score? Again, all of these are on a school-to-school basis. All of them are on a school-to-school basis. There is no one blanket judgment that the AAMC is imposing on the med schools at this point. There is a really good PDF that we will make sure you guys have access to in just a bit, about the med school's responses to the COVID-19 situations and how it's affecting their application deadlines. And so we'll make sure that you guys all get that, but it's a really good read through. What I wouldn't do there and sit there and like read through all of it, but you want to kind of pick out the schools that you're interested in applying to the cycle. So the ones that are local to you, or your dream schools, or both. Take a look and see what their responses are, and then kind of adjust accordingly to those kinds of guidelines. You don't have to know about every single school, just the ones that are important to you. Okay. Lots of great questions. Yeah, if you have the opportunity to talk to you know, med schools ahead of time and see what their responses are, I think that would be amazing. You know, given that a lot of people are not, like, they're delayed with the work environment, it might be a little bit harder to get a timely response back. But again, you know, there's no harm in giving it a try, for sure. Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about MCAT scores and timelines and applications a little bit more in depth with regards to GPAs. Oh yeah, so just real quick, I've got another question here. Is the AAMC going to automatically change my already fixed time? I'm scheduled for 8 a.m. There are no tests that's going to be administered at 8 a.m. None of them. You will always, all tests will have one of three time slots: 6:30, 12:15, or 6 p.m. If you're currently at an 8 a.m. test date, that will be changed, and it will randomly slot you into one of those three time slots on the same day. You can change that afterwards though, okay? So when the registration opens up on May 7th, you can change that to your preferred time slot. Whew, okay. Let's talk about timelines. Let's talk about you know, the pros and cons to your application overall. Let's say you're in a position where you don't have as strong of a GPA, and the GPA is a pretty solid component of the application, and you're planning to use your MCAT score this round to boost your application, which is something we talk about all the time. It's easier to get a higher MCAT than to increase your GPA, because it's an average, right, for the GPAs. So how's that going to affect your timeline? One thing to kind of keep in mind is with a delay here, and if you have other aspects of your application that still needs a bit of work, like maybe you were depending on the spring and the summer to do like shadowing or clinical hours, or you had to work in a lab, but all that kind of got canceled. A lot of this has kind of put a spin on people's plans, and I recognize how hard this is, because this is already not an easy process. If you were trying to boost your application or working on using that MCAT score to do that, it might be a good idea just to think about testing a little bit later into the summer. And if depending on how that all goes, possibly considering the gap year and then taking it next year, like applying next year, right? So take your time with the MCAT. The MCAT isn't something you can rush or cram for. But conversely, if you're in the other position where you've got a strong GPA, then and you've still got your MCAT kind of remaining to do for the summer, it might be actually more advantageous this year to just go ahead with an application with a strong GPA, and then you can submit your MCAT score on a more running basis. Like a lot of schools are now thinking, okay, go ahead with your application, and then when your MCAT score comes in, we'll consider that as it rolls. Okay, so that's kind of like a general advice for how you're using your MCAT and what it looks like compared to the rest of your application. Okay, whether or not it's going to be more competitive next year it's really anyone's guess. It's really hard to say. But if you're in a position where you've been studying for the MCAT for a while and you're getting in the place where you're close to being ready, please don't delay that. Just go ahead and push through and get it done. But if you're in a position where you're like kind of still far away from your MCAT, I don't want you to rush it just for the sake of the application deadline. It's important that you spend enough time to do this properly. Okay. Yeah, again, good, bad GPA is really subjective. It's really dependent on the school as well. But I just wanted to make it as a comparison. If your MCAT score and your GPA is like relatively level, then there's really no advantage other way. But if you have a kind of a high disparity between those two, like what are some of the considerations you can have with regards to taking a gap year versus kind of pushing forward with your applications? Okay. So what else can we talk about? I was planning to take my MCAT next year. I was going to take it in January. I was going to take it in April. Now that it's shorter, should I just, I don't know, push through and take it this year? So the short and long of all this is don't change your plans. If you were planning to take it this year, take it this year. If you're planning to take it next year, take it next year. I don't know if there's enough pros to a shorter test to outweigh some of the cons with the lack of break, the risk of testing when there's like an active pandemic going on. So I just would recommend that you just push through with what your current plans are, and then just to do it next year when things have probably, hopefully, definitely have calmed down. Okay. Yeah, it is holistic, and I wish I can just give you an answer for all this, but it is, that's the take-home message that all med schools have been talking about is we're going to consider your application holistically. All that means is that the number isn't the only factor, that they're going to have to more evenly distribute the factor, the weight, I guess, of the MCAT towards other parts of your application, which is why if you have parts of your application that are awesome, it might be worthwhile just pushing through. If you've got other things to work on in addition to the MCAT, take your time and make it awesome. Okay. Take your time and make it awesome. So I know Kevin and Logan and Carrie have been working super hard, as well as Petros, trying to answer your questions. So we do apologize if we did miss it, but continue to ask. Yeah, okay, so we'll do our best. We will do our best. When will it open? Actually, that's something I meant to address a little bit earlier. So I don't know if you've had a chance to kind of follow through with the way AAMC opens registrations for test day. Every year, every cycle, they never tell you exactly what time. They tell you the day. They tell you that they are normal working people that don't do this at like 1 in the morning. They won't tell you, or they won't tell anyone what time it is, but it's usually in the morning Eastern time. So if you're a Pacific Coaster watching this right now, you probably want to set your time, your alarm a little bit early, and make sure that you're up in advance of that. To be on the safe side, I would say like, I don't know, 7-ish in the morning Eastern would be a safe bet. Whether it's going to be at that time for sure, I cannot guarantee, but based on other release times, it's usually around that time. But other than that, yeah, it'll be a mad rush, I'm sure. Okay, so How do you focus on doing all things? With the addition of the, the extended time for a lot of us, that just gives you more time to work on your application in advance, right? Because we have the ability, the MCAT, the AAMC is not actually pushing out the applications. Like traditionally, I think the earliest it went to schools was the end of June. I think they extended that by additional 2 weeks. So it's not actually getting to schools until mid-July at the earliest. The reason why for this is just to give you a bit more buffer time to get everything in advance and done. So all the other aspects, your letters of rec, your personal statement, all that stuff to get it ready and to go. And the only last thing you got to add to that is going to be your MCAT score. Okay. Yeah, I guess 9218, I would say that that's a pretty amazing GPA, that it would be a good idea to maybe consider taking it this summer and applying. But again, I wish I can just give you a yes, no answer. It's going to be dependent on the schools as well. Okay. Okay. How do I start panicking and start focusing on studies? I have been totally prone to doing this and getting super distracted at reading the news, at talking and kind of stressing out about all the different things that have happened. Like if you've been at home and you're used to like studying at the library, I mean, this is a tough time to be taking a test like this. And how do I kind of manage my stress levels to start focusing on studying? A lot of advice around this talks about schedules, right? Make sure that you have tasks set aside, that you know exactly what you need to be doing, how long that should be taking you, and you just essentially chunk it down, goal by goal, break by break, little by little. Don't focus on the mountain that is the MCAT. I want you to focus on more immediate tasks. And once you kind of focus your busy brain on something, just one thing you got to do, usually that'll start calming you down. You can sympathetic arousal will kind of dissipate. You're going to think about a little bit more on focusing on the task ahead of you. So that is one thing I would recommend doing. It's something I do all the time with my own work. Okay. Okay. So guess 7854, anyone who is talking about like taking the MCAT this July and whether that's going to hurt your application cycle. Again, there's no hard and fast rule for that, but I would say it's okay, because even though traditionally people will be like, July is too late for applications cycle, everyone's having their deadlines and their, the people who are considering the applications, all of that's been extended for farther than what anyone had predicted. So if you're testing into July, I would just go ahead and see how that all works out. So like, don't worry about thinking that's too late. For now, just worry about getting it done. Just get it done, be safe, stay mentally sane, and don't add to all the things that you can't actually really control. There's none of that is something that you control, but focus on what you can control, which is your own studying. Okay. Yeah, there's no date. I wish I had a date for you. What's the latest day to be applied, to be considered in the first batch? I don't think it's a batch. I think it's more of a rolling basis. But if their initial roll of applicants is much smaller of a pool, then they have to keep looking at applications and then considering other ones. So whether it is that they consider it for a longer period of time or whether they expand their consideration, it is really up to the school. There is no one decision that's made for all schools here. That is on a school by school basis. Okay. Yeah, if you're one of our classroom students, guest, yeah, it's something that we talk about all the time. We talk about how to, one of the things I talk about in my own class is send me a screenshot of your week of studying, and then let's talk about, whether that's realistic, whether that's a good idea, whether it needs some adjustment. Go ahead and do it for a week and then tell me how it comes back. So that's something we talk about a lot actually in classes. So do med schools look at cumulative GPA or, to be honest, I'm not actually sure what I'm assuming that's like the science GPA is. Yeah. Oh, biochem. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So it depends again on the school. Some of them will consider the entire thing. Some of them more weight heavily the science GPAs or not. I think I would make sure, like, you guys all know what MSAR is. MSAR is a resource it's a paid resource through the AAMC, but it's actually fairly like reasonable. And all of that information is actually listed on a school by school basis on MSAR. So if you're planning on applying to like a good number of schools, it's a resource worth digging into for this application cycle. I would highly recommend. It's got all the info kind of in one place. A lot of questions kind of coming in about the whole credit versus non-credit thing. So I know that a lot of schools, especially if you're in school, like kind of finishing up or you just finished up, you know, schools have swapped to grades or GPAs or letter grades from that to like a pass fail. And so a lot of med schools are like, yes, we will take your pass, you know, pass fail kind of grade. But in addition to that, they've kind of amended that. And so again, it's not every school, but a lot of schools are saying, if you have the option of not doing that, maybe consider not doing it. Like if we can, the more info we can get about you, the better it is. Like a pass fail is very binary. You don't get as much information from it. So if you have the option to take the grade, they're recommending you want to consider that grade. Again, you're not doomed and lost if you did have to do that or if you chose to do it. But if you're in a position that you still have that choice, it's something to think about, okay? Yeah, okay. Gotcha, okay. Another question, how do I keep going when I thought I was gonna be done like last month? How do I keep going? I've like depleted resources. I've done all the AAMC stuff. I thought I was supposed to be taking my test and now I've lost motivation and I feel terrible. I haven't picked up, you know, I haven't opened my book. I haven't done any practice questions in weeks. I feel like this is, I've heard this question a lot from many students at this point. You know, it's tough. I think it's really important that you have a steady schedule and you are taking appropriate breaks. No, don't just take breaks just because you're tired. Don't just take breaks when you're sleeping. Sleeping is not a break, neither is eating. It's important that you maintain a division between studying and then doing something other than studying, that they don't all roll over into each other and then every day seems like Groundhog Day. Petros and I were talking about that earlier. Every day seems like the exact same. So it's important that you maintain strict divisions. Don't sleep in. I think I've learned my lesson. I'm really bad at that these days and I feel like trash. Even though I'm maintaining the same number of awake hours, I just feel really bad in the morning when I wake up. So try to just be like a little bit more stricter about your schedule, especially if you're not super sure about when you're testing. So don't go too far into turning into like somebody who wakes up in the afternoon and then be a little bit stuck with regards to your test date. Okay. Anyone who's one of my classroom students has heard me harp on this. Okay. Yeah, so the earliest that schools will begin to review apps, they've said, is coming in from the AAMC on July 10th. Yeah, that's the earliest that's going to happen. Okay. Yeah, it's super important. It is. Okay, so I'm jealous, Logan. I wish I woke up that early, but fortunately, I think that was like your time that you woke up was very close to the time I fell asleep last night. It's a very busy day yesterday. Yeah, it's not that, does the application for 2021 open? So it depends on what you consider 2021. So this cycle of application is application 2020 for entrance into med school of 2021. If anyone's a little bit confused as to how this all works, I too was, this is very confusing. It's a very long process, as it turns out, okay? Yeah, we don't know, guest 3926. I wish we could tell you what time it opens, but it's going to be morning Eastern time. So adjust for your time zones, you know, set an alarm, and then just check on Twitter. That's usually when they release the gates and let everyone go, okay? Everyone will, if you are currently in the system with a test, like registered and paid for it and everything, you will get a test spot. Now, it doesn't mean it's the one that you want or the time that you want, but you will have a test spot there. If you are not currently registered, then it's just like any other application opening, registration opening. It's just first come, first serve. You just go ahead and take a look and see what's there. Okay. Yeah, so Guess 6091, the 2021 test dates usually are released as like what the days are, usually in October of the previous year. So for 2021, usually they'll release it in October 2020. So after the administration of the 2020 test dates, usually about a month later, they'll tell us exactly what the dates are for the next year cycle, next year administrations. Okay. You know, I've had that question before too. So how early is too early with regards to studying? It's kind of depends on you. Like if you're currently a student, you've taken those classes fairly recently, you know, I don't think there's really any benefit to doing it for a whole year. That's a really long time. It's a big drain and burden on your head. But if you're in a position like I was like 15 years out of undergrad, I just didn't remember anything. Like all of that stuff was brand new to me. I took a whole year to study and I'm not ashamed or embarrassed of that. It's just, I didn't remember any of that information. I had to actually learn it all from scratch. So it really depends on you, how fresh that content is. With regards to how long you should be extending out the start of your studies to your test date. A lot of people end up having to study for much longer, so it's a little bit better to over project than under project. Yeah, and you can watch this video later on. You're more than welcome to just navigate back to this YouTube page and you will have access to this for whatever you like. Yeah. So guess 5602, clarify, studied for a test day that was not canceled. Exactly, that's exactly it. So you will be slotted into a time. It'll be on that date, but we don't know, you won't know what time that is. And you will have the option to change it. So, I mean, it's not like you're, I was having this discussion a little bit earlier with the student. You know, when you reschedule for a test date, you're in that spot and then you're choosing another open spot. So there's no like, you know, 1 millisecond, you know, time in space when you don't have a test spot at all. You're not going to pick one until, you know, you have the open spot and then you move to it. Okay. So if you do choose to do that, you certainly can for sure. But you just look in the system and see what other times and dates and locations are available to move it to. Okay. I mean, it kind of depends on how big that shadowing component is, right? So for the person who's asking, like everything else is set other than I guess the MCAT and maybe the shadowing component. If like the shadowing is a requirement for their school, then it's going to be pretty important to make sure that that's all set. If it turns out the school doesn't really care a ton about that, maybe consider actually asking the schools and seeing what the response is specifically. Okay, so guest 6269 with regards to time management, you don't really want to change your time for the full length on an individual question basis, right? So we talk about in our classes that science passages should be in general on average about 8 minutes. For cards, it's in general on average about 10 minutes, including the questions. That doesn't change. What does change though is the number of passages and questions, and we don't know that answer yet. We know that the science sections are going to be 11 questions less and cards is 5 questions less, but we don't know how that distribution is affecting the passage numbers, okay? So I just want you to stick with the 8 minutes for sciences, 10 minutes for cars, and then adjust depending on, you know, what ends up happening or as information gets released from the AAMC. Okay. Yeah, so if you're looking to start fall med school, fall of 2021, the applications are open for submission June 1st. So that is like for people who've been studying for the MCAT or planning to study or studying right now and are going to take it this year and plan to apply to enter med school next fall, then the application is open June 1st. So this is American, MD American schools, different for Canada, different for DO. Okay. I hope so. Guess 7444. I really, really do. Because at this point, you know, it's really anyone's guess. You know, we've got, you know, a team of psychometricians that are already working on thinking about like what would be the most reasonable if they were, you know, if they were working for the AAMC, what they would choose to do. And we're hoping like the brains are on the same wavelength and they're able to do that kind of prediction. So we're working on that currently right now when we're shortening our very first full length to the current format. But until at this point in time, we don't know. And I wish we would know. That would be really good for sure. Again, it kind of depends on the school. 3783, you know, the latest that you can take that test is so going to be very dependent on the school themselves. A lot of them are taking, you know, applications much later. A lot of them are going to fill up their spots. That's why the whole rolling admission is an important component. So, you know, yeah, keep an eye on that and ask more specifically on the schools. That resource that is pinned to the top of the chat will actually give you a lot of the information as well. If you are, if you have MSAR access, MSAR will also have that information updated. So I think like there's no cutoff to that point. I would say look to the individual schools and see what the responses are for the latest you can have your MCAT score in there. Okay. Yeah, for sure. 1685, you can still work on your applications even if you're not taking that MCAT until July, for sure. Actually, that's a wonderful use of your time. That way you're not kind of stuck on the whole MCAT thing. Okay. Those aren't deadlines. So the question that was asking about the June application first, the June 1st thing versus the MCAS. MCAS is the governing body that, you know, sends off the applications that you're submitting here and you're writing. That's pretty much all the American med schools other than Texas. And it's like your application has a lot of working parts to it. And what the AAMC does is takes all that information, make sure everything is there, make sure it aligns, it's verified, and that kind of processing actually takes kind of a long time. So what they're saying is that you can submit it on the day it opens on June 1st, but the earliest it'll actually see, like the schools will actually see it is July 10th. There's like a long time in there. And that means that, you know, don't worry about trying to get it done and rushing it for June 1st. Take your time a little bit longer. And because the earliest anyone will see it is June 10th anyways. Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure, 2406, with regards to whether or not your letters of rec have been all there. I believe the only thing, I feel like that is probably a no, but again, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe Petros will be able to speak a little bit more to that one. Okay. What if you plan on taking in September? September, that's a tough one. Most of my students who are taking it in September are generally doing it because that's the end of the summer. They've had the whole summer to study for. And usually what most students are doing is taking that score and applying it next cycle. Which is honestly, it's like the long game. It's actually very smart. It's a good use of your time because you're not trying to study for the MCAT while in school. It does mean that it's like you're gonna have to think a year in advance. It's not, you're not doomed again. You know, if you choose to take your MCAT in September and you try to apply for this cycle, it's just less likely that there will be a lot of available spots, right? So maybe even if you have an amazing MCAT score and an outstanding application, you still don't get a lot of bites. That's likely because it's at the end of the cycle. So you could, like, I don't think anyone's stopping you, but there just won't be a lot of spots there, is all. Okay. I'm so sorry, 1908. Oh, I'm so sorry that we didn't get all to all of your questions. Please do feel free, and I'll try to make sure to keep an eye out for that one. Okay. Mid-July too late. Again, no hard and fast rules, but I would say go ahead with the mid-Julys. Yeah. No, so I'm saying submit the application when it's ready. The earliest it gets to schools is July 10th, but it still has to go through processing. So let's say that it opens June 1st and you submit your application July 1st, it still has to go through at least 4 weeks of processing before it even gets to schools. So what they're doing with adding another 2 weeks there is to allow for a bit more applications to be in and then sent off. That's all that means, but it still has to go through processing. Oh, I can't read that fast. I'm so sorry. Guess 1446. Yeah, we have documents for this. I'm so sorry. Please do feel free to reach out to your instructor. All instructors have a copy of those WMIs, so we certainly can. Okay. Yeah, you can move your there's no limit because they waive all the registration fees. If you pick a time, you're like, I'm not happy with that, I changed my mind. If you can find another spot that suits you, you certainly can. Okay. Yeah. In general, again, I don't have like strict guidelines for that. In general, it's about 4 weeks of processing. Yeah. I would go ahead and try 8511. Normally speaking, like generally, like August 1st is pretty late for this cycle, but because of the whole extension, it's very possible that this is the time to do that. Okay. I wish I could speak to Casper. I did see a lot of questions about Casper. Casper is a separately administered test. A lot of schools these days are starting to require it. It is not content at all. It is more about your moral judgments and responses to moral situations. You know, you want to kind of look a little bit more into seeing what that is. But a lot of schools are requiring it. Yeah. Yeah. 3934, you know, they do get filled, especially if you live in like some of the more populated states, like California tends to be historically one of the areas that gets filled pretty fast. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and take a look at that link. It's amazing. Really, really good. Very comprehensive. Yeah, and lots of questions about mid-August. It's the same deal. I have no hard and fast answers for you. Just kind of keep in mind that it is school dependent, it is application dependent, but if you think you've got a good solid application and it's not going to be a huge financial burden for you, consider testing and applying this year. But there's no cutoff of any of that stuff. It's a rolling basis. A lot of people end up doing post-bac degrees with like graduate degrees to help boost the GPA. It is one great way to kind of work around that cumulative average effect of trying to boost GPAs, because that's hard to budge. So I would consider looking into it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so guest 8401, you know, it's in previous, like not outside of the whole pandemic situations, they did at least show, you know, which test dates were available. Whether or not that's going to be something that the AAMC does, I'm not sure. It could be just a mad rush on when it opens, and that's the only info we'll get ahead of time. It might be that they give you a glimpse and you can kind of plan ahead. But again, we don't know. Yeah. That looks good. 8912. Again, I wish I could guarantee you that's going to work, but that looks awesome. Depends on the schools for sure, but it looks very strong. Yeah. If you have further questions, there's another link at the very top. You know, you can book a chat with a Kaplan teacher, and it's not just like people who don't know about the MCAT. These guys are teachers. So consider clicking on that link. If you have additional questions, send them that way. If you're interested in purchasing a class or any of the other products, there's some info on the screen. And this thing right here, this whole /study thing is where we're going to probably curate a lot of the FAQs that have been generated from this event. And so if your question didn't get answers, I so apologize for that. I wish I had a chance to answer them all, but a lot of the more common ones we're going to kind of curate and put on there. So keep an eye out for that page. It's going to have a lot more additional information. Okay. You're very welcome. Yeah, it'd be really good if you're trying to apply the cycle, you want to secure those letters of rec earlier rather than later. That stuff is very, you know, time dependent. So it's making sure that, you know, you get all your ducks lined up in a row. Please do alert your, you know, the people who you're getting recs from earlier, like as soon as possible. Okay. Oh, so fast. Yeah, no, you got this. You know, this is all about planning. This is all about preparedness. And the fact that you guys all came here and listened to me talk for a whole hour means that you're invested and you are, you know, you're going to make sure all of that preparedness is going to be rewarded. Can you imagine on test day, there's a whole bunch of people out there that have no idea what the changes were, that don't know about the interface, that don't know to accommodate and prep for this ahead of time, right? They're like, I don't get 30 minutes of lunch. Like, this is all you making sure that you got your I's dots and your T's crossed, and you can conquer this. You could do this. So I'm excited for you. I'm excited to hear more about how this all works out for you. Think about channeling, you know, the stress and thinking about, you know, pushing you forward rather than a hindrance to you. So well done. Yeah. Great job. We look forward to hearing more questions from you as they come in. And yeah, hang out and ask questions, attend more events. We have lots more of these things. We've got also future ones on applications more specifically from people who work on the, you know, the team, admission consultants. So we also host events with them as well. So if you have more additional questions about that, consider attending one of these other ones in the future. Okay. Okay, well done. So have a great evening. If you're in one of my classes, I'll see you in about half an hour. Have a great evening, everyone.